Oh, hello! Welcome to the character law offices of Gustafson and Gustafson. Here we attempt to get to the very heart of the matter of the games we love by examining the character of the game. Through creation and mechanics, we can discover the merits and perhaps a few flaws of the games we love. So, thank you for joining us, and I hope you enjoy this Character Witness.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. I am Rob of the Law Offices of Gustafson and Gustafson, here with you once more for another Character Witness. For your consideration, I bring to you the game Star Wars The Role-Playing Game, which was published by West End Games, initial copyright 1986. This game is a bit long in the tooth, but this was one of the most successful franchise role-playing games ever, really. Of course, by the time this came out, Dungeons & Dragons was well established on the top of the hill, and there were a number of other companies that were still producing plenty of good gaming material. For instance, Iron Crown Enterprises making their Middle-earth role-playing game was certainly successful, and they created a lot of supplements and things for it. But the fandom for Star Wars had the advantage of being able to penetrate a wide variety of fandoms. It wasn't just about the literature nerds who loved Tolkien before these games came out. This was something for mass media. Many people from many walks of life watched Star Wars and enjoyed it. So therefore, the appeal of being able to be in that universe was pretty strong. And West End Games leveraged it nicely. They came out with obviously their role-playing game, and immediately started creating mass amounts of source books and supplements which served to expand the universe. Some of them stuck fairly close to the movies, but some of them went in completely different directions. To the point where if you played these games and you really read the rules and read the books, you became a master scholar in the Star Wars universe. Sadly, much of that is apocryphal now, thank you Disney. But there's still an amazing amount of material. Just a few of the books that we have here. Wanted by Kraken for the New Republic. Remember, this came out before the prequels and everything, so the major sources for these things were the 3 movies. Eventually, all of them came out. You also had the novels that came out, especially the Timothy Zahn novels. Those were, pretty fundamental to understanding what life in the universe would be like after the rebellion basically won and killed the Emperor, Vader, all the figureheads that were on top. And because the Empire was really built from the top down, cut off the top, the rest falls apart into a bunch of squabbling factions, moths, admirals fighting it out with whatever resources they had left. So there were a variety of scenarios and adventures, like Starfall for the combat scenario. You had adventures like Graveyard of Alderaan. You had source books like Planet of the Mists that would kind of add on to what you knew and what you had access to. We have some duplicates here because my friend who had all of these books really collected. I don't think he always checked with what he already had. Some of the source books, like the Imperial source book or the Rebellion source book, added new ships, vehicles, gear, characters and identities. Some of them extremely good. You had entire campaign scenarios like the Cathal Rift, which my friend ran one time. It was awesome. You had things that you could adventure in various sites throughout. Death Star Technical Companion. If you were going to, have rebels who were on the Death Star before it got blown up, it's pretty good stuff. And then, as you got to the New Republic, things like Dark Force Rising, which was a comic series, pretty good one. And these source books helped you to flesh all that out. The Heir to the Empire, which was the Timothy Zahn novel series, also having a stake. The Rebel Alliance source book. And as you can see, these are well-loved books. Some of them are barely holding together. You had Game Master screens, as you would expect from a role-playing game of the time. And then you had a large number of galaxy guides, giving you more worlds and planets to consider, including some that are familiar places, like Bespin and Galaxy Guide 2. Planets of the Galaxy, again, more planets. And Volume 2. We have lots and lots of stuff here. So, yes, I can do this and not worry about running out of material anytime soon. You also had criminal organizations for striding that legal gray area. The movie trilogy source book. If you ever want to know what's that guy's name, this is the book that'll tell you that. So if you want to know who all the people are in the cantina, for instance, right there, and their backgrounds and how they got there. So, as I said, just reading a couple of these books could really make you an expert on all things Star Wars quite quickly. Now, of course, the game evolved over time. Eventually, it would come out with a very successful second edition, and possibly the ultimate version of the D6 Star Wars game, the second reprint of the second edition. This took some of the storytelling elements of Star Wars and bumped it up a notch, which was good. And yeah, all in all, Star Wars is a very prolific game. And yeah, in case, I still have this stack that I'm not even going to talk about right now. But just lots of good material here. So, for those who loved Star Wars, they gave an outlet for you to roleplay in this universe and all the material so that you could feel like it was living, breathing around you. The actual extra books and everything for sourcebook material gave you the sense that the universe was infinite, showing you more possibilities, more characters, more conflicts, and different scenarios to put your characters into that was very much Star Wars, but different from everything you've seen in the movies, which is important if you're trying to portray a vast universe. And of course, at every level, there's conflict. There's situations your characters dropped into can rectify, can make things better. Even if they can't, say, come onto a planet and drive the Imperials off the planet, they can at least make the Empire miserable and maybe snatch a prize out from underneath them, which is really how you succeed on small levels in the rebellion. Is you make the Empire uncomfortable, you take what you can from them, and try to end up in the best scenario. Even if you don't ultimately beat the Empire in this day, it's more of a rebellion. It's not a conquest, it's fighting against the oppressors. So, before all of this stuff becomes important, you need a character. And we're going to show you how to make a character. Now, this game is template driven. To help you imagine your character, they give you several templates, which basically guide the way that you think about your character. It's a great jumping off point. Do you want to be a smuggler like Han Solo? Or maybe a young pilot with potential like Luke Skywalker? Do you want to be a minor Jedi? Because in the Rebellion era, Jedis were hunted and persecuted. If you demonstrated that you had the ability to wield the Force, count on somebody very high up and with a heavy breathing problem being very interested in you. To the point where eventually, if you got notorious enough, yeah, you could count on Vader showing up. And then you better run, because Vader has so much plot armor and he is ridiculously powerful. Now, the game has a lot of different layers and elements, but the core of it is very simple, very easy to understand. And if you groan at the idea of templates, which may seem like classes, don't. Your characters can evolve and completely shift away from the focus of what your template was driving towards. So, for instance, if you are playing a brash pilot and you think of yourself as a Poe Dameron type character, That's fine. You can stick with that. But that's kind of where Luke Skywalker got his start, as a brash pilot. That was his skill. He was good at flying, and eventually evolved into the most powerful Jedi Master in his time. So there's a great deal that goes into this game. The first edition was kind of wide open. They really hadn't firmed up a lot of their concepts yet on what separates Force-using characters and non-Force-using characters, because a lot of that was still being figured out by the movies. You had lots of people who just weren't attuned to the Force, but they really didn't differentiate in the earliest days. So, we're going to talk about all of that as we go to make a new character. So, stay tuned. This is going to be a fun one. All right, here we go with a fresh Star Wars The Role-Playing Game character sheet. So, you can see in this character sheet there's going to be a lot of elements that should be familiar to you by now if you've seen any of these character witnesses or played a role-playing game. Your character type is basically the name of the template. Your character name is your character's name. Player name is you. Height, well, I can fill that in right now. Character's height, character's weight, character's sex, character's age, physical description. These are all things that you come up with yourself in general. If you are playing an alien, some of those numbers can be quite a bit outside of the norm for humans, but since humans are some of the major characters, those numbers can be fairly easy to come up with. If you want to be tall, you can be tall. If you want to be old, you can be old. It's all not going to have a lot of numeric value in the game, but it just helps to come up with a concept for your character. On this side of the sheet, these are your attributes and the skills that are linked to those attributes. We have dexterity, which are going to be all of your action skills, your blaster, your grenades, dodge. Dodge is very important. Melee and melee parry, and brawling parry. That's fighting with unarmed combat. Knowledge, what your character knows. That one's fairly straightforward as well. So you're going to have your alien languages, your alien races, what you know about other races, streetwise, survival, things like that. Mechanical is all of your things that involve doing things with machines. So your starship skills are going to be there. Astrogation. Strangely enough, beast riding. Always one of the silliest things in Star Wars. Beast riding is kind of thrown under there because you are using a biological machine as a creature in order to ride it or direct it. So, in a way, it kind of fits, but realistically, that's something that doesn't fit very well in any of these other things, so that's where it goes under. Perception are going to be skills not only of being able to observe things, that's going to be your default default attribute role most of the time, but it's all of your skills that rely on what you see and can observe to make your determinations. Bargaining, reading another person and finding out what their limits are, how far you can talk them down. Command, con, gambling can be useful. A search, that again is going to be an extension on your perception skill when you need to notice something. But your basic perception is just for noticing something around you. Your search is when you're actively looking. Strength are going to be, well, most of your athletic abilities, but that also includes brawling. If you're really, really strong, you're going to be a good fighter, even if you're not naturally trained. But if you are trained, you can be devastating. Swimming, stamina is generally, how much you can endure and how far you can push yourself. Your technical skills are about repairing and manipulating technology without actually using it so much. So that's going to be things like droid repair. Medicine is under that as well, a somewhat technical skill. Your security, repair of all varieties, really. Demolitions, interestingly enough. So all in all, these technical skills can be very useful for non-action scenes, especially for recovering after battles and conflict. You have the 3 Force skills, Control, Sense, and Alter, which for non-Force characters is going to remain empty for the time that you play the character. Equipment up here. Certainly your gear is very important to you. What weapons you have, what other gear that can help you bypass obstacles, how much wealth you have in credits, that's useful. Your background, which a suggested background will be included in the templates that we're going to look at, but you can fly off and make your own too, just as easily. Personality, same thing. They'll recommend one in your template, but you can go with the personality of your choice. A quote, let's face it, most of the characters have some sort of tagline or quote that you see in the movie. I have a bad feeling about this, or the force is strong with me, or something like that. So it's good to be able to center yourself in the perspective of your character. Sometimes a quote can be ideal for that. And your connection with the other characters, because that is important. Starting off with some sort of a bond to the other characters so you actually care about them and won't sell them under to the Empire at your first opportunity. You want a reason to trust the other folk, even if initially it's just they hired me to do this. And then over here we have the final 4 statistics. Your force points, that can be a very important number in the game, and we'll explain that in a second. Dark side points. For some characters, this may go unused for the entire game if you play Lily White, but if you ride the edge and you do some things that are kind of sketchy, you can start getting dark side points. Get enough dark side points and you can lose control of your character as they spiral downward into being a villain and getting taken out of your control. So that can be a dangerous thing to dabble in. Your wound status, this game doesn't track hit points or anything like that. It uses a very abstract system of being stunned, being wounded, knocked out, or mortally wounded. Very simple. And skill points are what allow you to improve your skills. That's, again, fairly straightforward. That counts as your experience points, basically. So, now let's look at these templates. Each of several pages of templates gives you what your starting character would look like as far as your starting numbers. So the average for a heroic character is to have 3 dice, and dice in this game are all 6-sided dice. So with 3 dice you get a number range between 3 and 18, meaning that you have a chance of not succeeding at something that's relatively minor, say a difficulty of 5, there's a possibility you might not succeed at that. But most often you will. Something that's average difficulty rides the edge. Difficulty of 10. You have a decent chance of succeeding. You also have a possibility of failing that roll. And you can even do some rather tough tasks, let's say a difficulty level of 15. You can succeed at that sometimes. So that is how the dice system basically works. You roll the number of dice equal to your attribute or your skill, and you then total it up and find out if you meet the target number required. Now right here on the first page, for instance, we have the Alien Student of the Force. This is a non-Jedi. You are something non-human, and you have a different outlook on the Force. You are a Force user, but you're not going to run around with a lightsaber. Perhaps if the Jedi were still around, they might have reached out to you to try to get you into that, but you have a different outlook on how the Force works. It might be magic to you. It might be some elevated psychic connection that your character believes in. But all in all, your character is going to be one of the most proficient Force users. They start out with a 1 die level in skill in Alter, Control, and Sense, the 3 Force skills. As a result, those 3 dice are not included in the totals of the other skills, so normally a character averages out to 3 dice in all of the attributes. In this case, though, these 3 dice are taken out of the average, so their technical skill is only 2 dice, and their mechanical skills are also only 2 dice, which is equivalent of a non-heroic human, but it is definitely a weakness that they would want to shy away from. Their strength is 3 dice, which is average. Their knowledge is 3 die plus 1, which is a little above average. And 2 dice plus 1 perception is a little below average, and dexterity 2 dice plus 1. Now you might be asking, what are the plus 1s? Well, quite quite simply, the +1 just adds to the result of the dice rolled. So if you have 2 dice plus 1, you roll 2 dice and add 1 to the result. If you have a skill 2 dice plus 2, you would add 2 to the result. If you increase your skill to a 2 dice plus 3, that actually rolls up to 3 dice. So it's 1 plus 2. You won't see a plus 3 because then you're just going up to the next die value. And that is how these numbers work. Now, basically, you can break down one die into 3 plus 1s, 3 pips, they're called. So in this case, the +1, +1, +1 here would equal 1 extra die. And so therefore, this would be 3 dice, 3 dice, 2 dice, 2 dice, 2 dice, and 3 dice. So those 3 dice are the force abilities. And unless you haven't played many role-playing games, you can well imagine that 1 die in your force skills doesn't give you much power. Not much at all. You are very much a weak student of the force, but the fact that you know that the force exists and can use it makes you a very, very interesting person to the Empire. You are likely to slip under the radar because mostly aliens are seen as beneath contempt by the human majority of the Empire. But yeah, you're not going to run around with a lightsaber. You won't possibly be as conspicuous as a proper Jedi. Next, you have an arrogant noble. This could have been seen as Princess Leia's character. Again, you're going to have quite high perception because of all those wonderful interpersonal skills like command and bargain, con. You know, those are really good for a person who's the face of the group. Your dexterity is a little above average. You can fight a little bit. Your knowledge is a bit higher. Mechanical skills, not so much. You have other people who do that mechanical stuff for you. And the same thing with technical. You don't get your hands dirty too often. And you're not all that strong. Your armchair historian. Now, who would be the armchair historian in Star Wars? There wasn't one. There are a number of templates that don't have a direct analog, but have ideas for people who might potentially be rebels. And an armchair historian might know all the way back to, the Clone Wars and before that, and know about the time of the Republic, and not want to have to deal with the Empire, knowing that things are worse than they used to be, and maybe wanting to fight to get back to that. And as you might expect, if they are a historian, not quite as strong, and not quite as technical, but very, very knowledgeable. And decent at perception, too, so they can do things like search and so on. One thing I also want to remind you of, and these were on the character sheets too, there's a blank section on each one of the skills. There are what are called write-in skills, which are outside the average person, what they really are generally going to be likely to be skilled in, that you can write in if your character is going to go into that level of detail that they would actually be considered skilled at it. So for instance, if you get into technical, if your character is a hacker, in which nobody that you see in the movies really is a hacker. Computers just work. If you have to bypass a password, there's a security skill for that. But if you actually want to program computers or manipulate the programming of computers, that's a separate skill. So that is an example of a write-in skill. Also, if you have a weapon that fits outside of blasters, say your character is a primitive and they use a submachine gun, which there are stats for, but that would be a more primitive weapon, and that would be an example of a good write-in skill. So, now that we've seen what the numbers look like, the statistics, flipping this around, we can look at the backside. And this is where a number of extra points that might guide you in the flavor of your character are. So looking at the alien student in the Force that we saw first, your equipment, you have 1 statuette, amulet, or other trinket of obscure mystical import, and 250 credit standard. That's it. You really pay for being a Force user. You have very little, and there's no mechanical function in that game. It just has personal significance to you. So yeah, you start out with just a little bit of money, and that's it. So, but on the other hand, you are going to be one of the more powerful Force users starting out. So the background and its long and peaceful history, your species has learned much about the universe and the nature of existence. You yourself have contributed but little to this knowledge, but you have meditated long and hard on reality, and especially on that quality that humans call the Force. You have what humans call Jedi powers in some small degree, as do others of your species. Your race prefers its solitary existence and has never seen reason to have commerce with the rest of the galaxy. But you have decided to leave your native planet. Perhaps you seek the true Jedi, hoping to learn more about the Force from them. Perhaps you are simply curious. Perhaps the Empire has committed atrocities on your planet. Choose any of these motivations or invent another, but clear your motivation with your Game Master if you make up your own. A note. You may choose whatever appearance you wish. Your species is rarely encountered in the galaxy, so your appearance is not commonly known or identified. However, strange-looking aliens are common enough that your appearance is rarely remarked upon. So, for instance, if you wanted to be that alien in, say, Men in Black that was at the Men in Black receiving offices that looked like a giant stack of bubbles, you could do that. Your statistics, you might want to swivel around a few of your statistics to match what your character is going to physiologically be like. But that's not a terribly difficult task in this. It's just taking a die value from one thing and moving it to another. Personality. Think of yourself as a mystic, more of a tradition different from that followed by the Jedi, but of similar nature. Like Yoda, Kenobi, or the fully trained Luke Skywalker, you are calm, a little humble, and treat every living being with respect. A quote, I am a servant of the light, and of the life which infuses it. And your connection to other characters. You might agree to accept a brash pilot or another character as a student. You might be eager to learn from a failed or minor Jedi. You might have befriended a laconic scout, smuggler, or gambler in your travels. So just different ways of reaching out to other people. So let's, the arrogant noble armchair historian, let's look at somebody who's a little bit more action-oriented. Switching back, let's see. We've got, let's go with a bounty hunter. Well, let's look at all the different classes. We have bounty hunter, high dexterity, naturally, for those fighting skills, and high strength, decent perception, and nothing too terrible until you get to technical, which obviously many bounty hunters might actually end up picking up some skills and working them up in that area. And the good news is if your attribute is low, the initial improvements to your skills are actually relatively cheap. So you might want, for instance, demolitions to get at a particularly hard target. The brash pilot, again, think Luke and you're okay. Your high skill is going to be mechanical, but you're going to have a solid technical skill. The rest of them tend towards pretty average. Your knowledge is going to be the lesser of them. You can play an Ewok. Yes, you can. You could do it. I have had somebody who played an Ewok and concentrated on the annoying aspects of being an Ewok, so be warned. You have the failed Jedi. This is a Jedi who slipped away when the purge of the Jedi came about, and he feels terrible about it and has picked up a drinking problem. But there is a chance, and so he's coming back to the rebellion to try to use his skills and try to redeem himself. The gambler, think more like Lando Calrissian. There's a lot of different directions you can go from this, but your high perception could definitely help out the party, and you have a pretty good dexterity too. The kid. Another person who looks like they might not be all that useful to a group, but remember, kids can often move places and not be noticed by the adults or taken seriously, and many of them have surprisingly good skills in different things. The high dexterity means that, yeah, okay, this kid could actually be a gunslinger, but if he's packing around a DL-44, heavy blaster pistol, people are going to notice that. So to keep the usefulness of the kid as a kind of a wild card, oftentimes you're going to want them to be a little bit more subtle. And you should, if you're going to be playing a kid, you need to play somebody who can work with the group and be an asset, not just a hindrance. That's important. Laconic Scout. Laconic means I don't talk very much, so you're the quiet scout, but you have a lot of useful skills for survival and things that might help out a group. Loyal Retainer. Sure, there's all types in this. The Merc. If you want to start with heavy guns, the Merc is not a bad way to go. And oftentimes that is a determinant factor, is who has good gear starting out. A Minor Jedi. This would be a person who just started to be a Padawan and then had his training cut off. Again, probably because of the Purge. They went underground, or maybe they found a Jedi Master for a little bit who saw their potential and started training them, but that training got cut off. So now they're looking for more training and will use their little bit of skill that they've got. Important thing about the Minor Jedi is I'm pretty sure they start out with a lightsaber. So that's a big step. You get your lightsaber to start out with. Even though they're not going to be very good with that lightsaber, because part of the ability to wield a lightsaber well is you need to have some control power, but you also need to be able to sense, so you're as much of a danger to yourself as anything. So at this level, it's your door opener, really. The Mon Calamari, interestingly enough, the race as a whole is, well, if you remember back to basic Dungeons and Dragons where a dwarf or an elf or a halfling is their class, that's basically this. The Mon Calamari people are typified in certain ways. Their skills can branch out from that, but because of the way that they're portrayed as all pretty much being of the same type and then just specializing outside of that, this Mon Calamari would be mostly described as a technically skilled being who is a pretty well-rounded character. Of course, being a Mon Calamari means they're going to have certain strengths and certain weaknesses. They are amphibious, but they need to get into water periodically or they dry out and can sicken and die. So there's interesting things to that. Your old senatorial, this would basically be like Princess Leia, but she's not old. And this would be like a retired senator who is trying to help out the rebellion the way they can. You have the outlaw. The outlaw is somebody who has really been burned by the Empire, so they are hell-bent on revenge. I played one of those once. It was fun. The pirate, sure. The rebellion will take anybody who will help them fight the Empire, so sometimes some of the shadier types. The Chaotic Jedi. Chaotic is in Don Quixote, meaning that they are not very well versed in reality. They see things through a filter, imagining themselves to be a Jedi, and they do actually have the skill sense for the Force, but they can't control the Force. They just hear whispers and urgings. You have the retired Imperial Captain. This actually gives you some knowledge of how the Empire works, which could be very useful in a group. The Smuggler, your iconic Han Solo template. You do get to start out with a starship with the Smuggler, which makes them attractive to have one in a group. Your tongue-tied engineer, not going to be... This is more of your kind of a geeky, nerdy type of engineer. Not going to be able to talk to other people well with a low perception skill, but brilliant at technical and very good at overall knowledge. So that works out pretty well. Your young senatorial... Okay, that would be Leia. Again... The Senate has just been quashed fairly recently, so yeah, a lot of the people who were in that sphere would definitely want to stand against the Empire. A Wookiee. Wookiees are, of course, incredibly strong. They have a 5 dice strength, which is huge. Yes, Wookiees can pull people's arms out of their sockets when they lose. They're also quite good at technicals, so it's not unusual for Chewbacca to be the first mate of the Millennium Falcon. He actually is not bad at his technical stuff by inclination. The Wookiees are pretty good at that. On the other hand, dexterity, they're a little on the clumsy side. They are somewhat naive in their various knowledges. Not the most perceptive, all that hair in the eyes probably, but they're immensely strong. And also as an alien race, they attract a certain amount of attention. So sometimes the Wookiees can be tough to have in a group, but when they are playing up their strengths, they're they're definitely useful to have. Tough native, this would be most likely human or near human from a more primitive world. I played one with a chainsaw one time. That was kind of fun. All right, so we're looking through the different characters, and we have to decide on a template. Technically, you don't have to do that. You could make up your own. Again, bearing in mind that you can't have any force skill starting out greater than 1 die, and it's paid for out of your total number of dice that you have for the attributes. But you have 18 dice to split between the 6 attributes and your 3 force skills if you're interested in doing that. And therefore, you can make just about anything you can conceive of. You just have to run it by the storyteller, the game master. So this is a guide. This is a tool to get you on the path, but it's something you don't have to use if you don't want to. In this case, let's make a bounty hunter. I've never made a bounty hunter before. So, Star Wars names. Star Wars names are fun. The first name is usually a monosyllable for most humans, or relatively short, and it can be an Earth name. Luke, for instance. It's only later, as the Star Wars universe developed further and further, that names became less and less traditional human. You don't see a Fred out there. But there's precedent that you could. Counter. Okay, but I want a name that will strike fear into people as my reputation grows. So, I think as a character name... Ooh. I, again, don't often like derivative names, but I think Belor might be fun. You know, we're not playing Dungeons & Dragons, so a Belor... the type of demon, and this one kind of definitely a sinister aspect. And last names should be evocative of the character. For example, Skywalker. They were pilots. Makes sense. Han Solo. He operates solo a lot of times. Leia Organa. Well, her organic solutions to a lot of things involve dealing with the people, less so than technology. And so that all seems to work. So I think we'll go with Baylor Farseeker. Baylor Farseeker. Now that's a good name for a bounty hunter, I think. We're going to copy down his numbers real quick. Dexterity of 4 dice. Knowledge of 2 dice plus 2. Mechanical of 2 dice plus 2. Perception of 3 dice. Strength of 3 dice plus 2. And technical of 2 dice. Nothing in control, sense, and alter. That's on purpose. This character is not likely to want to be a Jedi, unless the Game Master has a very interesting story involved for that. Height, generally an intimidating height can be an asset, so I think we'll go with 6'3". A decent size in the galaxy. Weight, with his strength of 3 dice plus 2, he's not going to be a lightweight. So we're going to go with 250 pounds, I think. A lot of muscle. Very, very strong. Sex, we're going to do male. Age, well, he's kind of young. He doesn't have to be old and grizzled. And I think we're going to put him at 26 years. Now, yes, I know different planets will have different length of time for years, but it's useful to use, for frame of reference, if for nothing else, Terran standard. So the years would be Earth years, so as our understanding goes. I think Coruscant time ends up becoming standardized, and I believe that is roughly equivalent to Earth. So yeah, that all works. Physical description, let's say black hair. Scar on his right cheek. heavily built. Bodybuilder style. Cold blue eyes. And we'll say he's got a military tattoo on his shoulder. On his right shoulder. Okay, so that's a few nice things to, if you're going to see this character, and you get to know him to the point where you might see him without his shirt on, you could see the tattoo. If he's not wearing a helmet, you'd be able to see the scar on his face, his hair, and say, well, actually, no, we're not going to make him Caucasian. We'll say he's, black, with, black skin. Yeah, don't need to make Caucasians all the time. So, all right. Yeah, blue eyes might be interesting. Hinting he might not have. Yeah, that'll be good. All right. So now that we have the basic numbers down, we can flip to the other side of this panel. And resume looking at the bounty hunter. In this case, boy, they start off with a lot of equipment. You start with a heavy blaster. A holdout blaster. That's a tiny gun that can fit practically in your palm. It's a fairly useless weapon, but sometimes it may be all you have. Blaster pistol. The kind that you would wear slung off of your shoulder, or off of your hip, maybe. A thermal detonator. Now, thermal detonators, of course, if you've seen them, they are kind of shown as being similar to a grenade, but they're actually a demolitions weapon for mining and things like that. To the point where it's hard to throw them far enough where they won't hurt you if you use them. They are definitely a weapon of last resort, but they're one of the most dangerous weapons in the game. A knife. Another knife. So knife times 2, we'll just put. A protective vest. No, we don't start off in the armor from Mandalore. No, it's just a protective vest. That gives a little bit of a boost to resisting damage. A jetpack. Hey, we do get a jetpack. And 2 med packs. One for you and one for your target. And 1,000 standard credits. So a decent amount of money. So yeah, all told, he's got solid combat skills and a wide arsenal of weapons. Not too bad at all. Alright. Background, Blaster for Hire. That's you. You're still young at this game. But already you've killed 23 people. But who's counting? The galaxy stinks. But a woman's gotta make a living. Yeah, you can play a female bounty hunter easily enough. Some say you've got no morals at all. That's not true. You live by a strict code. A contract is a contract, that's all. You do your job. Then someone hires you. When someone hires you,
You keep up your side of the bargain, no matter what it takes. Sometimes what it takes isn't pretty. But if you were squeamish, you wouldn't be in this line of business. The Empire hired you. You did the job. A good man died. You fulfilled your side of the deal. The Empire didn't. You could have taken them to court, but they owned the courts. They laughed at you, but not for long. Usually you work for 1,000 a day, plus expenses. But this time, it's personal. You got a contract with the rebellion. For the duration, your pay is a credit a day, and you fulfill your contracts.
All right. Well, that's a decent revenge storyline. And also, it makes your character embittered towards the Empire, which keeps you in the game. In this case, though, I think that fell out of local planetary army when the Empire invaded. I took over. They don't have to invade when they can surround your planet with star destroyers and threaten to destroy your cities. Took up bounty hunting. To pay the bills. And get off home planet. We'll call the home planet Sildry. Still resentful of Empire. Now wanted by Empire. After a few contracts against local imperial targets. There. Now I have a reason to join the Republic, or the Rebellion, for self-protection, and demonstrated that I don't like the Empire very much.
Personality. Hoorah, gung-ho. Brawler. With a sneakily suspicious mind.
So he's a character who doesn't mind getting into a fight, and at the same time he thinks more than people suspect that he does.
And quote, how much do you figure this is worth? If we were getting paid.
So yeah. We don't have other characters at this point, so we're going to leave that part blank. Now, the last part of this is fleshing out your skills. Your characters have 7 dice to split between your skills. Not your attributes. You can't improve your attributes at this point, but your skills can go up above the level of the attribute they're under. If you don't increase your skills, then when you do something, like say if I don't put anything into languages and I need to understand a language that I hear, I would roll my default of 2 dice plus 2. Likewise, if I try to strike somebody in melee and I'm not skilled in it, I'm still rolling 4 dice, which is pretty good. So I don't feel a need to up my melee right away to use my knives if I have to. That's not really my focus. So I have 7 dice to split, and I can put at most 2 dice into each one of the skills that I improve. I can also break up a die into 3 pips if I want to do that. So obviously my character is going to be skilled with Blaster, so I'm going to put a die into Blaster to make that a 5 dice. Likewise, I want to survive, so I'm going to put 5 dice into Dodge. So that's 2 of 7 taken care of. I generally don't like to split up dice. I'm like, if you're going to improve something, you might as well throw it up by at least a full die. So I'm not going to worry about heavy weapons or grenade. Melee parry might be good, but there's some other things. Demolition. I want a demolition score in case I need to use demolitions to get into things. Now another thing that I have a jetpack. And as you see here, there's no jetpack skill. But as a write-in, I can have jetpack operation, which I believe is mechanical. So I will put jetpack op, and I'll put a die into that, making that 3 dice plus 2. Now I'm not going to be flying all over the battlefield. It's mostly going to be useful for short jumps under controlled circumstances. Only if I'm really desperate would I go for more than that, but still, if I have it, I might as well know how to use it, right? I think so. Also, pretty good in a fight, and sometimes being able to take somebody down in non-lethal tech could be useful, so I'll put a die into Brawling. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We've got 2 more left. Bargain might be good for a person who is his own professional businessman. And if I'm on a ship, I want to be able to do something. I think Starship Gunnery. Give myself some skill in that. That would be 3 dice plus 2. If I get behind the guns of a ship, I can actually have a decent chance of hitting something. So let's just to make sure. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Oops, I did too much. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. No, I didn't. Okay, I was adding my knowledge. Okay, right now this character is finished, but there's a couple of details. First of all, we have 1 force point. We start with no dark side points, we are unwounded, and we have no skill points to start out with. A couple of the mechanical things about this that we can discuss from this character sheet. As I said, if I want to do something, I would look at the skill, and if I have training, I would use that. So if I want to shoot somebody, I have 5 dice in Blaster skill, and I would roll 5 dice and total that up. This would be a roll of 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, which is enough to hit a person who is at fairly close range, who isn't trying to get out of the way. Which, you know, that's 5 dice is pretty good as far as accuracy goes. If I am trying to knife somebody, again, something I wouldn't normally try to do, that's not really my skill set, but I still roll 4 dice. And in this case, I would get 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. So I'd have a decent chance in hand-to-hand combat against another person. If I'm doing something defensive, like I need to dodge, I would again roll my 5 dice, because that is my skill in dodge. And this is kind of an interesting thing. I could opt for a basic dodge, where they would replace their difficulty with what I just rolled. In this case, that's 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. This would count as one of the actions in my turn, and as you do more actions in a turn, you get a die penalty for every action. So for example, if I say I want to dodge in this turn, and I want to shoot him, and I want to shoot him, I would take 2 dice off for the 2 extra actions. So I'd dodge with 3 dice, I would attack with 3 dice for both of my shots. So once I get more skilled, that becomes more feasible, but at low levels, you don't want to overdraw yourself. Now, if I spend a force point at a certain time, I really need to do something awesome. If I spend a force point, I double my dice pools for a round. So all of a sudden, my blaster becomes 10 dice in skill. My dodge is 10 die. So now if I want to dodge once and shoot 2 people, I would be rolling 7 dice for each attempt. Pretty darn good. And that's a good time to do a flurry of activity. Force points are fickle, though. If you use it just because you're in an ornery mood and I just want to shoot that guy a bunch of times, you won't get that force point back. Yes, you can go down to 0 force points. If you use the point, but it is in a good time and it is used for a good purpose, when the mission, quest, whatever is over, you'll get that point back. And if you use it at the dramatically appropriate time, the climax of the story, and you use it well, you'll get it back at the end of the story with a bonus point. That is important because that's how you can grow out your force points. So if you have 1 or 2 to blow, you can do something really amazing or even somewhat shady. But if you are using it for bad purposes, you can expect to get a dark side point for that. Drawing on the force to do evil things can get you in trouble. So using it to go, psycho slasher and make 5 attacks at a person with my knife because they looked at me wrong, that would be worth a dark side point. And as I said, the more dark side points you get, you do risk going over to the dark side and becoming a villain character. All the characters in this game are heroes. They are from all walks of life, but they are designed to be heroes in the style of the rebellion against the Empire. Some of them are just darker heroes. This character would be an example of somebody who's a little bit darker, but still has the potential for being a cool, fun character. Now, eventually you get skill points. Skill points can be used to add to skills that you have. May require training depending on your game master, but usually if you are simply using skills during gameplay, you can justify increasing your statistics based on what skills that you've used through the actual play session. Obviously, there's some things that my character is not so great at, and I'm definitely going to want to shy away or lean on other characters who are good at those things. But I have a lot of white space to improve what I can be good at, and I also have some clear-cut skills that I am already quite good at. And you would increase them, again, a pip at a time. So if I have 4 skill points, I could increase my brawling up to a 5D from 4D plus 2. That's basically these characters in a nutshell. With 2nd edition, it gets a little bit more advanced, but this is pretty standard. Now, gaining skill in force skills, requires you to find a teacher. That can be absolutely brutal in an actual game of Star Wars, considering you're in the Rebellion era, and there aren't exactly Jedi Masters lying thick on the ground. Matter of fact, when they're lying on the ground, it's probably because they've been killed. So one of the central themes, if you're going to be playing characters using the Force, is going to be trying to find a master. And oftentimes their knowledge is going to be sketchy. The master themselves may be barely serviceable, and what they can teach you may be somewhat tainted. But for a character that uses the Force, you gain Force skills, different applications of the Force that match things you may have seen in the movies. The ability, for instance, that Vader uses when Han Solo shoots him and he just absorbs the blast into his hand. That's a Force ability. Being able to astrogate without using your computer, like Luke Skywalker does, going to Dagobah. That's a Force ability. Far-seeing is a Force ability. Lightsaber combat is tricky because it actually uses 2 different skills at the same time, so you're going to have some penalties to using it. But once you're good at it, the damage you can deal out is incredible, and you can block blaster shots, which can be a lot of fun. But it takes forever, unless you start out at a more experienced character than these, before you can do all those cool things. These are very much your starting characters, pretty much where the heroes of the movies probably started out at, although many of them were obviously a bit more experienced than this. So, as we will see, perhaps if we actually go over the individual books and take a look at those characters at the snapshot in time. But as of right now, this is a finished character we would be able to play in a game just like this. Now, when we do the character witness for 2nd edition, we'll be able to compare the differences between the two. But this is where this game started. This is familiar to me, and yeah, feels good to do this again. So thank you, and back to me. So that is how you make a character for Star Wars, the role-playing game. Interesting in that it's very, very simple, and quite honestly, outside of coming up with the statistics for your skills, you really don't have to do a great deal of work. If you photocopied off the various templates and just cut them up, you could very easily call them pre-generated characters, slap down 7 skills, give them each 1 die, and away you go, just like I just did. Does that mean the game was incredibly shallow? A lot of what went into that game was the world, the universe of possibilities. Making the characters was basically a formality. You picked who you wanted to be in that. And yes, it could be somebody just like Han Solo or Luke Skywalker or Princess Leia. You could, very easily. But if you wanted to play somebody a bit different, the possibilities were there. And again, if you got out of the templates and made exactly the character that you wanted, it mostly would come down then to you wanting to have certain features or things and then getting your game master's approval. Now, with some of the different races, clearly there were some things that made certain classes better than others at certain things. You would have a hard time finding somebody who could go toe-to-toe in a physical combat with a Wookiee. Their huge strength, plus the fact that they could pile on and be even better at brawling, for instance, or learn a bit of finesse and be good with melee weapons and truly do shocking amounts of damage with the right weapons, means that their natural alien structures give them a huge advantage. And as Star Wars would develop, as they would develop the universe, they came up with a wide variety of different races that you could be, celebrating the variance and differences in a theoretically infinite universe. You were introduced to races that are somewhat familiar, like Jawas, perhaps, or Ithorians. And at the same time, even this relatively early game had the Mon Calamari. Relatively basic, not a lot of variations on the character deviating from humanity. Most of them were fairly close to humanity in their own ways, with just a few extra rules. But as time went on, the differences grew greater. It was eventually revealed that Wookiees had claws. They have climbing claws that they can just pop out. But a Wookiee's code of honor forbids them from actually using it in combat. So despite the fact they've got big stonking claws that can do, I believe, an extra die or 2 dice of damage, they only use it for climbing. But if you would think of an unhinged Wookiee who would come at you with claws, I'd be frightened, quite honestly. And the different things that the technology of the universe allows. Transport between planets, starfighter combat, vehicle combat of all types, speeders, tracked vehicles, land vehicles. Nothing doesn't exist just because it wasn't seen on the camera. So it's not outside of the bounds to, have a world, for instance, where people still ride animals. Tauntauns and Hoth. But you could also have 4 6-legged creatures on a relative plains world with lots of flat land that was just easier for the settlers and the people living there to train the native animals to carry them where they wanted to go or be beasts of burden. Maybe there's something on that planet that forbids hover technology or repulsor technology. It's all possible. That was a world that was on one of my adventures. So, with that most basic level of character creation, that is your entry point into a much larger world. The core book does a pretty good job of drawing you in. It has some sample adventures for the Game Master. It's the Game Master and players all in one. There's no separate Game Master's guide, which is nice and requires a certain level of conciseness. Because quite honestly, what went into the Game Master's information was just how you frame an adventure, what a world is like. A couple sample adventures too, which was nice. Sample ideas especially. And there was a fun and memorable intro adventure that you could start off with a group that would teach them to use a variety of skills to overcome obstacles, a little light combat, and set them on their path to joining the rebellion and becoming members of their own story, becoming the heroes. It is, all in all, probably one of the more efficient books with the text, because a lot of that book is filled with glossy pictures from the movies. There's movie clips, there's concept art. There's a lot of world building that goes into that you can just take the book and show players what you're talking about with a particular droid or a certain look for a blaster. And as you got more and more books, they kept to that high standard of having a lot of art. But when you're making a character and you're looking at the most basic mechanics, this is a very simple, basic game. Later versions got more complex as players demanded it, basically. But this is how you'd make a character. Very straightforward, very easy to do. And there's plenty of room for modifying such a system. Clearly, the D6 system without the Star Wars is still owned by West End and still floating around out there. But the elements of Star Wars, the Force powers, the Force point, are fundamental in tying it to the universe, and then all of the fluff, all of the extra materials that you were able to get into back in the day just sealed the deal, basically. So, thank you for joining me. This has been another Character Witness. Hopefully you've enjoyed it. Until next time, which probably won't be too far out, and I think we'll be looking at the second edition. This has been the Law Offices of Gustafson and Gustafson, and hopefully you are ready when somebody brings you and your character to question. Thank you, and farewell.